Shout out to Johanna Castillo, sent it to me. And she said, just read it, because I was looking for movies that could be commercial and speak to the human.
There were moments on set when the director stepped back and allowed the women involved to take the lead in shaping certain scenes, choosing to engage more as an actor than as a director. He didn't want those scenes to feel as though they were being controlled or framed through a male perspective. So he consciously removed himself from that dynamic when appropriate. Switching gears to the legal developments surrounding Wayfair and its related entities, another lawsuit has been filed, this time against the Wayfair Foundation, which shut down nearly a year ago. The closure of the foundation coincided with significant events involving Steve Sarowitz. And now a former employee, Celeste Smith, has brought a federal lawsuit against him. Although Justin Baldoni's name has been loosely connected to the broader network of companies, he had no direct involvement with the Wayfair Foundation, did not work there, and played no role in the circumstances described in the lawsuit. The foundation itself was based in Chicago, and that is where the alleged conflict occurred. The timing of this case raises questions because the events at issue took place almost a year ago, and the foundation's closure preceded Smith's termination. In her complaint, Smith explains that she had worked at the nonprofit branch of Wayfair Pathways for several years and had even been promoted multiple times. She claims she was aggressively recruited and promised that the foundation would exist for at least 15 more years, implying long-term job security. However, in the United States, employment is generally at will unless governed by a specific contract, meaning employers can terminate employment at any time. Promises about the longevity of an organization can also be difficult to enforce, as nonprofits can close for a variety of reasons. Smith brings her claims under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. Title VII applies to employers with 15 or more employees. One complication is that the Wayfair Foundation reportedly had fewer than 15 employees. To address that issue, Smith attempts to connect the foundation to Wayfair Pathways, the for-profit parent entity, arguing they operated under a unified umbrella. Whether the court accepts that theory remains to be seen, as she was technically employed by the foundation rather than the larger company. In her complaint, Smith identifies herself as a 52-year-old African-American woman who is Muslim and a member of the Nation of Islam. She alleges anti-Muslim discrimination and xenophobia, describing what she characterizes as hostility from leadership, including questions about her faith and her involvement with the Nation of Islam. She recounts attending a breakfast at Steve Sarowitz's home where she says she was asked specific questions about the Quran and her religious affiliation. The religious component of the case adds further complexity. Title VII protects employees from discrimination based on religion, but it does not extend protection to political ideologies or social doctrines that fall outside core religious practice. The Nation of Islam is distinct from mainstream Islam and promotes a set of social and political teachings, including black separatism and other community-focused doctrines. Smith frames her allegations as anti-Muslim discrimination, but the legal analysis may turn on whether the alleged conflict involved protected religious practice or broader ideological disagreements. She also references tensions connected to discussions about Israel and Palestine, adding another layer to the dispute. Overall, this case presents a mix of employment law questions, religious discrimination claims, and organizational structure issues. The foundation's size, its relationship to the parent company, the nature of any promises made regarding long-term employment, and the distinction between religious protection and ideological conflict will likely be central to how the court evaluates the claims. The Nation of Islam is a separate, religious movement founded in the 1930s in the United States. For decades it has been led by Louis Farrakhan, who, by 2024, is in his 90s and largely out of the public eye. The organization has a long and controversial history, including teachings rooted in black separatism and rhetoric that has at times portrayed white people as inherently oppressive or evil. Malcolm X was famously a minister within the Nation of Islam during the 1950s and early 1960s before later breaking away from the group. One of the disputes described in the lawsuit centers on a proposed $50,000 grant to a Muslim clinic in Chicago. According to the complaint, Steve Sarowitz questioned whether the clinic had ties to Malcolm X's widow, Betty Shabazz, who is now deceased. The issue, as framed in the lawsuit, is presented as anti-Muslim bias. However, an alternative interpretation could be that the questioning related less to Islam as a religion and more to concerns about ideological alignment. If a foundation's stated mission emphasizes unity and social oneness, leadership might reasonably scrutinize whether a potential grantee promotes separatist principles or racially charged doctrines that conflict with that mission. As the primary funder of the foundation, Sarowitz would have discretion to evaluate whether organizations seeking grants align with the foundation's values. That kind of vetting, at least on its face, concerns ideology and mission fit rather than religion alone. The Nation of Islam's history includes positions that many consider extreme, such as opposition to interracial marriage and, at times, rhetoric widely criticized as anti. A donor deciding not to associate his foundation with such controversies does not automatically equate to discrimination against Muslims generally, particularly given that the Nation of Islam is distinct from mainstream Sunni or Shia Islam. The religious dimension becomes even more nuanced considering that the foundation is described as Baha'i-inspired. The Baha'i faith emphasizes unity of humanity and draws in part from Islamic texts, including the Quran, though it is a distinct faith tradition. Mainstream Muslim communities themselves often do not recognize the Nation of Islam as part of Orthodox Islam, viewing it instead as a separate movement with unique doctrines. That distinction could matter legally, because Title VII protects individuals from discrimination based on religion, but it does not protect every political or social ideology that may accompany a religious affiliation. The complaint also references tensions related to discussions about Israel and Palestine, describing an incident in fall 2024 in which Sarowitz allegedly expressed strong concerns about pro-Palestinian activism at an event. He reportedly later apologized, and at one point was even told he could not come into the foundation's office despite being its primary financial backer, after leadership changes, including the CEO taking a leave of absence and eventually departing. An interim replacement was needed. At that stage, Sarowitz appointed Jennifer Wiggle to an interim leadership role. The plaintiff alleges age discrimination, claiming Wiggle was 8 years younger, that she was denied the opportunity to apply because there was no formal hiring process. However, Wiggle is reportedly 2 years older than the plaintiff, not younger. She is a 3-time Emmy Award-winning journalist in Chicago with extensive public-facing communications experience, nonprofit involvement, and a long-standing relationship with the foundation. In an emergency or transitional context, there is generally no legal requirement that an organization publicly post or conduct interviews for an interim executive role. Ultimately, the case weaves together allegations of religious discrimination, ideological conflict, age discrimination, and procedural unfairness. Whether the dispute centers on protected religious identity or on disagreements over political ideology and organizational mission will likely be a key issue for the court to determine. The complaint also expands into disability and age discrimination claims. After suffering a rib injury at home, she sought protections under the ADA and was placed on a restricted schedule of 4 hours per day, working remotely. During that same period, she continued filing internal complaints against both Steve Sarowitz and Jennifer Wiggle, asserting retaliation and hostile treatment. Much of her frustration appears tied to Wiggle's interim leadership appointment, which she believed she deserved. She characterizes Wiggle as significantly younger, though publicly available information indicates Wiggle is actually older. While on medical leave, tensions escalated further. She alleges that Wiggle made unreasonable demands and that responses to her complaints were retaliatory. At the same time, she continued filing grievances against the foundation and its leadership. Then, in late April, a serious external event occurred. An individual allegedly attempted to set fire to Sarowitz's home and issued violent threats against him and his family. These threats were reportedly graphic and deeply disturbing. Within days before any arrest had been made, Sarowitz shut